Hello, everyone. This is Rabbi R.A. Sachs coming to you with another edition of this week's online Parsha class. This week, we're learning about Parashat Matot, Ma-asei, which are the last two Torah portions in the book of Numbers, in the book of Bamidbar. Next week, we'll begin the book of Devarim, the final book of the Torah, the book of Deuteronomy. And as a double Torah portion, there's a lot to read generally, although we focus on the triennial cycle, so we're actually only in the middle of this Torah portion, which actually happens to be the very end of Parashat Matot and the beginning of Parashat Ma-asei, which corresponds to Numbers chapters 32 and 33. Where we're going to be focusing on is actually towards the end of Parashat Matot, specifically dealing with the moment in which the tribes of Gad and Reuven, who have a lot of cattle, that they're going to be passing over the Jordan to get into the land of Canaan, where they're going to be fighting with the inhabitants there. And they say to Moses, why can't we just stay here since this land seems to be best for us? And then we hear Moses's response, which is basically God's response to that. And I think that one of the most fascinating elements of this as I was reading through it was that it really resonated with what is happening today. That the current situation in the Middle East regarding the deal with Iran, which has yet to be agreed upon fully by the Security Council, but has been agreed upon by the principal players, and there's a raging debate now going on Capitol Hill, speaks a little bit to the question that's being asked right now. To what extent do I go to war with my brothers and sisters? Meaning, as an ally, should I, if I am far away from the fight physically, meaning that I live over here, which is most of the countries, including America, Great Britain, France, and European Union or so, even living in a globalized world, we're not actually in the particular region. To what extent should I determine the life of those who are actually living in the region? And what is very fascinating about the first level of, you could say, concern or reaction to the Iran deal is that, interestingly, all of the regional players in the area, except for a few, but most of the regional players who are considered the allies of the United States, including Israel and Saudi Arabia, although many of them don't necessarily get along with each other, they all agree on this issue and the concern over Iranian hegemony in this area given the deal. And the question is, does America and the other nations who live further away, are they taking themselves out of the issue because they don't necessarily live here? And do they know all the particular issues since they don't actually live in the area? Which seems to be the core of this question in the Torah, because we have these people who are saying, we want to live over here. We don't want to go into this land that you're going to fight over. We want to be over here. And is that the way in which brothers and sisters, or allies in this case, should behave and should react? And I think that question, and the answer that we get from a commentator in the early 18th century, the Or HaChaim, who lived in Morocco, Algeria, and Israel, actually gives us something very interesting to think about in the current political situation today. And without further ado, we're going to get to our text. Umikne Rav Haya Livnei Reuven Livnei Gad. Now the children of Reuven and Gad had a lot of cattle, Atzu Me'od. Vayiru et Eretz Ya'azer, and they saw the land of Jazer, vet Eretz Gilad, and the land of Gilad, which was on the other side of the Jordan, not in the land of Israel, or the land of Canaan. V'hinei hamakom makom mikne. And this was a great place for cattle. So, Vayavo v'nei Gad uv'nei Reuven, and so the children of Gad and the children of Reuven, Vayomru el Moshe ve'el Elazar haKohen ve'el Nesiyei ha'edah lemor, and they came to Moses and to Elazar the priest and to all the different princes and said to them, Atarot v'divon v'ya'azer v'nimra v'cheshbon ve'elaleh usvam u'nevo uva'on, all these different places on the other side of the Jordan. Haaretz asher hika Adonai lifnei adat Yisrael, the land which God has smote before the assembly of Israel, Eretz miknehi. This is a land meant for cattle. V'la'avadecha mikneh. And your servants, meaning us, we have cattle. So put two and two together. Vayomru imatzanu chem be'enecha. And if we have found favor in your eyes, yutan. May you let this land, et haaretz hazot, this land, la'avadecha la'achuza. May you let this land be given to your servants. Al ta'avirenu et hayarden. And that we should not be brought over to the Jordan. Now, interestingly about this particular passage, that we have here, first off, the fact that that these people, that these different tribes who have this cattle, coming across this land, seeing this is a perfect land for us. It's like, you're driving through the middle of Jersey, and then you see this town, which is just, the people are perfect, the houses are perfect, the kind of living that you want, all the different amenities, and you say, you know what, this is just perfect. I don't need to go any further. I don't want to go any further. And so you say, can we stop here? Now, you're not telling everyone that you should necessarily stop. And in fact, the fact that they go to Moses and to Eleazar and to the princes is to say that we want this to be a consensus. We're not going to simply say that we're doing this and that's it. We want you as the leaders to be able to tell us if this is okay with you. In addition, the language of giving, which is here yutan, is a passive word, not the tzivui, not the instructive or command form of titen. And that's important because yutan means may, if you so desire, please give us this land, as opposed to give us this land, as opposed to a command, meaning that they understand the fact that the ultimate choice has to be by these leaders, and yet at the same time, they're simply saying that we would like to be able to stand on this other side. So to take the analogy that I kind of raised earlier, that if you have allies who are saying, this is what we would like to do because it benefits our particular interests, they still go and speak to their allies about what they think will work for them. And they offer it to them for them to be able to make that kind of final decision, since they're the ones who are most affected by it. At the same time, it's not a perfect analogy because usually allies are purely independent of one another, and Reuven and Gad they report back to Moses. But the idea that they're trying to say, we think this is actually going to be best, not just for us, but for you as well. And so here, this is where we get to the commentary by Or HaChaim, which I think is particularly fascinating. This phrase in chapter 5, Al ta'avirenu et hayarden, do not make us cross the Jordan. In this selection, they offer four arguments of why they do not want to cross the Jordan. The first argument is the two tribes implied that if Moses were not to grant their request, he would in fact transfer their rightful inheritance from its proper place. Now, this is a bit of a very fine argument, very specific in terms of the word, of how the words are used. And for that, want to turn back to verse 5, where it says, Al ta'avirenu et hayarden, bring us not over the Jordan. Al ta'avirenu has this connotation of being a passing over, which seems in this case to be referring to how physically the people are passing over the Jordan River into the land of Canaan. But there's another usage of the term laha'avir, which appears in Numbers chapter 27 and referred to actually in the Bavli Talmud in Masechet Bava Batra, page 109, in which that phrase laha'avir is used in the case of the daughters of Tzlofchad. If you remember the case of daughters of Tzlofchad, they are four daughters of their father Tzlofchad, who had no children, who had no sons, and generally the inheritance passes on, is transferred, laha'avir, goes on to the sons, but it does not go to the sons because he had no sons, generally would go then to the brothers. But the daughter said, we believe we should rightfully inherit it. It's saying, come on, don't you know that we're here? And so they say it should be passed on to them. And it leads to this whole conversation in the Talmud about how this kind of transfer, what this kind of transfer looks like. Does it go from the father directly to the daughters, or does it go from the daughters to his brothers, who then it goes to the daughters? And there is this kind of deeper conversation about how the actual passing goes, how the kind of transfer is made. And one of the key points in the Gemara is that there's a specific phrase used in the Torah which signifies that the land that the daughters get is transferred from its original source, meaning their father, to them. It doesn't go through a third party like the brothers. That use of the term laha'avir, or to transfer from its original source, is what the Or HaChaim is saying that the Israelites, or the tribes of Reuven and Gad, are using here. Because if you look back at the text, it says, Al ta'avirenu et hayarden. Don't let us pass over the Jordan, meaning don't let the original inheritance that appears from the Jordan, from us being on this other side of the Jordan, don't let it pass from us. So that they saw this land as being fully theirs, or as being perfect for them. And they said, this is what we should be receiving. And if we go over to the land and we fight in that other land, then we might have right to that territory, but then we're going to lose the right to this particular land because we went over there. And so we're simply saying, this is what seems to be appropriate for us. We're not telling you that that's necessarily wrong for us, but saying this is what's appropriate. And if we leave here, if we leave this land, then we're going to lose our inheritance. And they're looking out for their own sense of self-interest, but at the same time, they're not saying that they don't want to go into battle, which is partially the next point that our Or HaChaim is mentioning. They also intended to remove from themselves the suspicion that they chose this land in order to live more tranquilly and not enter the land of their enemies. This is why they explain that the reason they saw no point in crossing the Jordan was only that they did not stake a claim to any part of the land across the river. They were not motivated by a desire to escape their duty to take part in the war of conquest. In other words, another way to read the Al Tavirenu Tayarden is to say, we don't want to claim this land that we're going in and take it from the people who deserve that land. Everyone should get the land that they most deserve. That's the most important part. You get your part, I get my part. We find the right way to divide it. And they saw going over there as saying, we now lay claim to that land when they don't necessarily want it. So in that regard, Or HaChaim is saying, they're actually thinking about the needs of the other. They're saying, you should get what you need, just like we get what we need. This leads to the third point, the third argument. They even implied that the fact that they would not cross the Jordan enabled all the other tribes to each receive larger slices of land than they would have received if they had to parcel it out amongst 12 tribes. Meaning that just like if they went over, that they would have some claim to the land, then now that they don't have a claim to the land, others can actually have more territory. So they really are thinking about the others. And then the final argument, which is also something that Moses is going to address, it is also possible that they meant no useful purpose would be served by their crossing the Jordan, seeing God would do the fighting that had to be done anyway. Which this is a very important point, something that it may not necessarily be easy for us to fully understand, but that especially from the perspective of the Or HaChaim, from medieval rabbis, that and you could argue that also comes from the text of the Torah, that the warriors who fought in the wars were not fighting themselves. They were present while God was doing the fighting, which is a very important point and something Moses is going to bring up. They have a role to play, but they're not the ones who are doing the fighting. So the tribes are saying, look, God's going to do it. Do you really need us? As if to say, we are your allies. We're here to support you. But if you don't really need us, then you don't have to use us. And number two, if you don't use us, it's going to be better off for you and also better off for us because we're going to get the land that we want. So there is a relationship between the two. They're not separating themselves from the people. They're saying, we recognize our place here, but at the same time, we know that there are certain differences amongst us. So how does Moses respond to this request of these other tribes to say, we are a little bit different than you? I'm going to read the full verse as it appears in the Hebrew, although you have just a little bit here. Vayomer Moshe livnei Gad v'livnei Reuven, and Moses said to the children of God and children of Reuven, Ha'achechem yava'u lamilchama, that your brothers are going to be present for battle, ve'atem teshavufo, and you're going to reside here. Ve'lama tini'un et lev b'nei Yisrael me'avor el haaretz. Should I get it right? And why will you turn away the heart of the children of Israel from going over into the land asher natan lahem Adonai, which the Lord has given to them? So first part is to say, are you simply just going to let your brothers go to war? Which seems to be, if you look at it on its very basic level, seems to be what's happening here. They're saying, God and Reuven are saying, we don't want to fight your battle. You're going to go over and fight. We're going to stay over here. And the second is that you're turning your heart away from what God is being given you. Now, it seems from this particular from this particular reading of the text that Moses is really getting angry at God. In fact, the Rashi points out that in the language that Moses uses, which is Velama tini'un, that kind of language is one of timiha, is one of surprise. Like, I can't believe you're actually raising this to me. This is ridiculous. But Orach Chaim actually takes a little bit of a, you could say, softer view. He doesn't think that Moshe is actually looking at these tribes as harshly as it may seem. Moses understood full well that the tribes of Gad and Reuven had in mind with their words, or I should say, what the tribes of Reuven and Gad and Reuven had in mind with their words. Meaning, he knows all of the arguments that Orach Chaim had laid out beforehand. He knows what they are, and he recognizes that, you could say, the validity of them. And I think it's also that he recognizes that they're not trying to separate themselves from a close relationship. At the same time, he advanced some counter arguments to what it is that they were offering. First, in regards to the tribe's first three arguments, that one, that if they pass over, they're going to lose their rightful inheritance. Two, that they don't want to stay claimed to land across the river. And three, that the other tribes would receive larger slices of land, saying, we're going to get ours and you're going to get yours. Moses' response: the lands belong to God to do with as God saw fit, and the other tribes had not established a claim to these lands. This is very important because the second verse that Moses uses, it says that this is land that, where is it here? Asher natan lahem Adonai. This is the land that God has given to them. Meaning, God is the one who decides who should get what land. you, Gad and Reuben, yeah, that land for the cattle, that may seem right. Maybe that's not what God wants for you. Maybe God does not want Gad and Reuven to actually have that land. Maybe God has something else in store, and you're going to claim that land, and you're going to be the first ones to do so, because no other of your tribes, and other tribes, they probably have some cattle. Dude, they haven't made a claim to any land, so why should we listen to yours? Meaning, it's not that what Gad and Reuven were necessarily wrong in their or that they weren't trying to separate themselves in the request, but that it wasn't their place because they were not the ones to make the final decision. It was God who was supposed to make the final decision in terms of who it is that is supposed to get what particular land. It's to say that we're all a part of something that's a little bit bigger. We shouldn't simply be thinking about what it is in our own, what our own needs are at this time, but to be thinking what are the global needs in this particular case, which is what God's needs are in this particular instance. But I think in a much larger sense, it is our role in the larger picture, and to always be thinking about the larger picture and not just to be thinking about the smaller picture, which you could argue is one of the concerns regarding the Iran deal, that the Iran deal is focusing on one particular issue and not the larger issue of Iran's regional play within the Middle East. So that's the first counter argument. The second one, though, I think this is I think the most important for us to at least to talk about. Or to at least mention, and I think can help us with our current issues in the news and even in our own lives. The tribe's argument number 4. Also possible that they meant no useful purpose would be served by their crossing the Jordan, seeing God would do the fighting that had to be done anyway. Why risk our own? We don't need to be there. It's not incumbent upon us for you to be successful. But Moses' response is, it was quite true that God would do the fighting. He agrees with them. But the army of the Israelites had to be present and prepared to do battle, meaning that it was important for everyone to be there. And how can we prove this from the text? Moses did not say, Ha'achichem yilchamu, are your brethren to do battle, but he said, Ha'achichem yavo'u lamilchama, are your brethren going to be present in order to do battle? He could not understand that these two tribes were not willing to be present at the time when the Israelites would conquer the West Bank. And just to kind of show you that in the particular text, in this verse 6, Ha'achichem, it should say, Ha'achichem lamilchama, that your brethren shall go to war, but instead it says yavo'u. And that sense of yavo'u is that they will come to be at war. They will be present in this moment. And why this point I think is so important, because it's saying what it means to be an ally, what it means to be a partner, is to always be present, to not say this is your battle, but to say I will always be with you, I will always be present, I will always be there with you. We may have different needs, we may have different goals in mind, but that as allies, as brothers in this case, our job is to be present together. If we are not present, if we are separated, then our power dips. And in fact, Moses actually says, or Chaim says in Moses' voice, that if there are fewer people who are there, then God's power actually becomes less. And therefore, it is not, they may not be able to be successful. God may not be able to lead them to victory if everyone is not present. And that I think is very instructive for us, because however we come out on the side of the Iran deal, that the question isn't just about whether or not this deal is actually going to do the job it's supposed to do, but also, especially since the deal ends at a certain point in time, will our allies always be there with us and present for us and supporting us, both when it comes to Israel and its allies, especially America, but the other Gulf regions and their particular allies, and working together to deal with any potential issues that come up, because no one is saying that this deal is going to create Middle East peace. Rather, that there are many difficult challenges still to come, and the question is whether there is still that trust that our allies are really going to be present for us. That is where I think the essence of how allies relate to each other is important. Yes, we have different needs. We have different lands that we are focusing on. We're not all the same. We have different ways of influencing the world and different interests. But if we're allies, if we're brothers, it means that we support each other. It means that we will provide for one another. It means that we'll be present for each other. Whether it's thousands of years ago, whether that's today, whether that's tomorrow. Hope you enjoyed today's class. Take care and Shabbat Shalom. Bye-bye.